Chapter 4. A Day of Rest, a Parable for the Young People, Quiet Recreation, Geographical Nomenclature, the margay and porcupine skins made use of, an exhibition to Tentholm, potatoes, tropical vegetation, the use of karatas, Jack's greediness and its punishment, Ernest discovers cochineal, arrival at Tentholm, the poultry rebellion, return to Falconhurst, Ernest roused out early, we collect wood for a sledge, Master Knips turns thief, Franz's plans for saving of ammunition, Ernest and I take the sledge to Tentholm, Ernest's laziness exemplified, he catches a salmon, we start for home, kill a kangaroo, and cook it. Next morning, all early awake, and the children sprang about the tree like young monkeys. "What shall we begin to do, father?" they cried. "What do you want us to do today?" "Rest, my boys," I replied. "Rest." "Rest," repeated they. "Why should we rest?" 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work thou hast to do, but on the 7th thou shalt do no manner of work. This is the 7th day, I replied. On it, therefore, let us rest. "What, is it really Sunday?" asked Jack. "How jolly." "Oh, I won't do any work, but I'll take a bow and arrow and shoot, and we'll climb about the tree and have fun all day." "That is not resting," said I. "That is not the way you are accustomed to spend the Lord's day." "No, but we can't go to church here, and there's nothing else to do." "We can worship here as well at home," said I. "But there's no church, no clergy, no organ," said Franz. "The leafy shade of this great tree is far more beautiful than any church," I said. There we will worship our Creator. Come, boys, down with you. Turn our dining hall into a breakfast room." The children, one by one, slipped down the ladder. "My dear Elizabeth," said I, "this morning we will devote to the service of the Lord, and by means of a parable. I will endeavor to give the children some serious thoughts. But without books or the possibility of any of the usual Sunday occupations, we cannot keep them quiet the whole day. Afterward, therefore, I shall allow them to pursue any innocent recreation they choose, and in the cool of the evening we will take a walk." My wife entirely agreed with my proposal, and, having breakfast, the family assembled around me as we sat in the pleasant shade of the fresh, soft green grass. After singing some hymns and offering heartfelt prayers to the Almighty Giver of all good, I told the children I would relate to them a parable instead of preaching a sermon. "Oh, that would be delightful. I like the parables in the Bible better than anything," said Frank. "When can we hear you read out of the Bible again, Father?" "Ah, my little boy, your words reproach me," returned I. While eagerly striving to procure from the ship what I felt our bodies and provide for their comfort, I blush to think that I have neglected the bread of life, the Word of God. I shall search for a Bible on my next return to the wreck, although our own books were nearly all destroyed. I'm pretty sure to find one. At these words, my wife arose and, fetching her magic bag, drew from it a copy of the Holy Scriptures, which I thankfully received from her hand, and, after reading aloud from its sacred pages, I spoke as follows. "A great king, ruling in power and splendor over a vast realm of light and love, possessed with its boundaries a desolate and unfruitful island. This spot he made the object of his special care, and, lavishing on all of it the varied resources of his might and goodness, it bloomed in beauty and became the happy residence of a band of colonists, who were charged not only with the cultivation and improvements of the soil, but each individually was bound to cherish in his soul the spirit of love and true allegiance to his sovereign. While this faithful union was maintained, the colony flourished, and its noble virtues exalted and rendered happy the existence of every member of the race. That a discontented and rebellious spirit should ever have infected these unfortunate subjects of so loving a master seems incredible. Yet it was so. Disobedience and pride brought their misery and punishment. The fair prospects of the colony were blighted, the labors of the colonists were unblessed, and total separation from the parent kingdom seemed inevitable. A message of pardon, of free forgiveness, was nevertheless accorded to these rebels, and to all who, humbly accepting it, molded their future lives to the will of the great king, now revealed a character of even more gracious than before, was held out the promise of removal at last from among the ruins caused by the great rebellion to the glory and undimmed splendor of the realm of light and blessedness. Having interested the children, I then, leaving allegory, pressed simply and earnestly home to each young heart the truths I sought to teach, and with a short prayer for a blessing on my words, brought the service to a close. After a thoughtful pause, we separated, and each employed himself as he felt disposed. I took some arrows and endeavored to point them with porcupine quills. Franz came to me to beg me to make a little bow and arrow for him to shoot with, while Fritz asked my advice about the tiger cat skin and the cases to contrive from it. Jack assisted with the arrow making and inserted a sharp spine at one end of each reed, made it fast with pack thread, and began to wish for glue to ensure its remaining firm. "Oh, Jack, Mama's soup is as sticky as anything," cried Franz. "Shall I run and ask for a cake of it?" "No, no, little goose. Better look for some real glue in the toolbox." "There he will find glue, to be sure," said I, "and the soup would scarcely have answered your purpose. But, Jack, my boy, I do not like to hear you ridicule your little brother's ideas. Some of the most valuable discoveries have been the result of thoughts that originally appeared no wiser than his." While thus directing and assisting my sons, we were surprised by hearing a shot just over our heads. At the same moment, two small birds fell dead at our feet, and looking up, we beheld Ernest among the branches. As bending his face joyfully toward us, he cried, well hit, a good shot, wasn't it?" Then, slipping down the ladder and picking up the birds, he brought them to me. One was a kind of thrush, the other a small dove called the ortolan, and esteemed a very great delicacy on account of its exquisite flavor. As the figs on which the birds came to feed were only beginning to ripen, it was probable that they would soon flock in numbers to our trees, and by waiting until we could procure them in large quantities, we might provide for ourselves with valuable food for the rainy season, by placing them, when half cooked, in cases with melted lard or butter poured over them. By this time, Jack had a good supply of arrows and industriously practiced archery. I finished the bow and arrows for Franz, and I expected to be left in peace. The young man next demanded a quiver, and I had to invent that also to complete his equipment. It was easily done by stripping a piece of bark from a small tree, fitting a flat side and bottom to it, and then a string. Attaching it to his shoulders, the youthful hunter filled it with arrows and went off, looking, as his mother said, like an innocent little Cupid bent on conquest. Not long after this, we were summoned to dinner, and all right willingly obeyed the call. During the meal, I interested the boys very much by proposing to decide on suitable names for the different spots we had visited on this coast. "For," said I, "it will become more and more troublesome to explain what we mean unless we do so. Besides which, we shall feel much more at home if we can talk as people do in inhabited countries, instead of staying, for instance, the little island at the mouth of our bay where we found the dead shark, the large stream near our tent across which we made the bridge, the wood where we found coconuts and caught the monkey, and so on. Let us begin by naming the bay in which we landed. What shall we call it?" "Oyster Bay," said Fritz. "No, no, Lobster Bay," cried Jack, in memory of the old fellow who took a fancy to my leg. "I think," observed his mother, "that in token of gratitude for our escape, we should call it Safety Bay." This name met with general approbation, and was forthwith fixed upon. The other names were quickly chosen. Our first place of abode we called Tentholm, an islet in the bay, Shark's Island, and the reedy swamp, Flamingo Marsh. It was some time before a serious question of a name for our leafy castle could be decided, but was finally entitled Falconhurst. And we rapidly, Horst in German means nest or eyrie. And we then rapidly named the remaining points: Prospect Hill, the eminence we first ascended; Cape Disappointment, from whose rocky heights we had strained our eyes in a vain search for our ship's company; and Jackal River, as a name for the large stream at our landing place, concluded our geographical nomenclature. In the afternoon, the boys went on in their various employments. Fritz finished his cases, and Jack asked my assistance in carrying out his plan of making a cuirass for Turk out of the porcupine skin. And after thoroughly cleansing the inside, we cut and fitted round the body of the patient dog. Then, when strings were sewn on it and it became tolerably dry, he was armed with this ingenious coat of mail, and had a most singular figure he cut. Juno strongly objected to his friendly approaches and got out of his way as fast as she could, and it was clear that he would easily put to flight the fiercest animal he might encounter, while protected by armor at once defensive and offensive. I determined to make also a helmet for Jack out of the remainder of the skin, which to his infinite delight I speedily did. Amid these interesting occupations the evening drew on, and after a pleasant walk among the sweet glades near our abode, we closed our Sabbath day with a prayer and a glad hymn of praise, retiring to rest with peaceful hearts. Next morning I proposed an exhibition to Tentholm, saying I wished to make my way thither by a different route. We left the tree well armed, I and my 3 elder sons each carrying a gun and game bag, while little Franz was equipped with his bow and quiver full of arrows. A most curious party we formed. Fritz, adorned with his belt of margay skin, and Jack, with his extraordinary headdress, looked like a couple of young savages. Their mother and I walked together, she of the whole party being the only one unarmed, carried a jar in which to get butter from Tentholm. We were thus preceded by the dogs, Turk armed most effectually with his cuirass of porcupine skin, and Juno keeping at a respectful distance for so formidable a companion. Master Knips fully intended to mount his charger as usual, but when he saw him arrayed apparently in a new skin, he approached him carefully, and touching him with one paw, discovered that such a hide would make anything but an agreeable seat. The grimace he made was most comical, and, chattering vociferously, he bounded toward Juno, skipped on her back, seated himself, and soon appeared perfectly reconciled to the change of steed. The flamingo saw us starting, and, having been much petted during the last day or two, considered himself entitled to accompany us. For some time he kept beside the children, following one and then another, as they explored the wood on either side. Their irregular course, however, at length disgusted him, and, abandoning them, he walked sedately by my side. We strolled on in the cool air, following the course of the stream. The great trees overshadowed us, and the cool green sward stretched away beneath them at our feet. The boys roamed ahead of me, intent on exploration. Presently I heard a joyful shout and saw Ernest running at full speed toward me, followed by his brothers. In his hand he held a plant, panting for breath, and with sparkling eyes held it up to me. "Potatoes, potatoes, father," he gasped out. "Yes," said Jack, "acres and acres of potatoes." "My dear Ernest," said I, for there is no mistaking the flower and leaf, and the light, clear green bulbous roots. "You have indeed made a discovery. With a potato we shall never starve." "But come and look at them," said Jack. "Come and feast your eyes on thousands of potatoes." We hurried to the spot. There, spread out before us, was a great tract of ground covered with the precious plant. "It would have been rather difficult," remarked Jack, "to not have discovered such a great field." "Very likely," replied Ernest, smiling, "but I doubt if you would have discovered that it was a potato field." "Perhaps not," said Jack. "You are quite welcome, at all events, to honor the discovery, and I'll have the honor of being the first to get a supply of them." So saying, he dug up with hands and knife a number of plants and filled his game bag with the roots. The monkey followed his example, and, scratching away with his paws most cleverly, soon had a heap beside him. So delighted were we with the discovery, and so eager were we to possess a large supply of roots, that we stopped not digging until every bag, pouch, and pocket was filled. Some wished to return at once to Falconhurst to cook and taste our new acquisition, but this I overruled, and we continued our march, heavily laden, but delighted. How, said I, can we thank the giver of all these blessings sufficiently? "Oh," said Franz, "we can say we thank thee, O Lord, for all thy goodness and mercy, and bless us for Jesus Christ's sake. Amen." "That would not be sufficient," said Fritz. "Do you think it would be enough just to say to father and mother, thank you for all you do, and not show them how we're really thankful by loving them and doing what we can to please them?" "You're quite right, Fritz," said I. "Franz did not say all that was necessary. He should have added, 'Give me grace to do thy will and obey thee in all things.'" And thus we talked. We reached the head of our streamlet, where it fell from the rocks above in a beautiful, sparkling, splashing cascade. We crossed and entered the tall grass on the other side. We forced our way through with difficulty, so thick and tangled were the reeds. Beyond this, the landscape was most lovely. Rich tropical vegetation flourished on every side. The tall, stately palms surrounded by luxuriant ferns, brilliant flowers, and graceful creepers, the prickly cactus shooting up amidst them, aloe, jasmine, and sweet-scented vanilla, the Indian pea, and above all, regal pineapples, loaded the breath of the evening breeze with their rich perfume. The boys were delighted with the pineapple, and so eagerly did they fall to it, that my wife had to caution them that there were no doctors in our territory, and if they became ill, they would have to cure themselves as best they might. This advice, however, seemed to have small effect on my sons, and showing Knips what they wanted, they sent him after the ripest and best fruit. While they were thus employed, I examined other shrubs and bushes. Among these, I presently noted one which I knew well from the description to be the karatas. "Come here, boys," said I. "There's something of far more value than your pineapples. Do you see that plant with the long, pointed leaves and the beautiful red flower? That is the karatas. The filaments of the leaves make capital thread, while its leaves themselves, bruised, form an invaluable salve. And the pith for this wonderful plant may be used either for tinder or bait for fish. Suppose, Ernest, you had been wrecked here. How would you have made a fire without matches or flint or steel?" "As the savages do," replied he. "I would rub 2 pieces of wood together until they kindled." "Try it," said I, "but if you please, try it when you have a whole day before you and no other work to be done, for I am certain it would be night before you accomplish the feat. But see here," and I broke a dry twig from the karatas, peeling off the bark, and laid the pith upon a stone. I struck a couple of pebbles over it, and they emitted a spark, and the pith caught fire. The boys were delighted with the experiment. Then I drew some of the threads of the leaves and presented them to my wife. "But what is the use of all these other prickly plants except to annoy? For instance, is it a disagreeable little tree?" "That is an Indian fig," said I. "It goes best on dry, rocky ground, for most of its nourishment is derived from the air. Its juice is used, I believe, medicinally, while its fruit is pleasant and wholesome." Master Jack was off in a moment when he heard of the new delicacy, and attempted to gather some of its fruit, but in vain. The sharp thorns defied his effort, and with bleeding hands and a rueful countenance he returned. I removed the thorns from his hand, and, making a sharp wooden skewer, I thrust it into a fig, and quickly twisted it from its branch and split it open with a knife, still holding it upon the skewer. The rest followed my example, and we regaled ourselves upon the fruit, which we found excellent. Ernest carefully examined the fig he was eating. "What are these?" he exclaimed presently. "The little red insects. They cling all over the fruit, and I cannot shake them off. Can they be cochineal?" He handed me a fig, and I examined it attentively. "You are quite right, my boy," I said. "There's no doubt that this is real cochineal. However, though it is worth its weight in gold to European traders, it is little use to us, I'm afraid, unless any of you appear in gay colors. The cochineal, you know, forms the most lovely scarlet dye." "No, thank you," said Jack, "but we'll take a lot of it when we go home again. Now let us find something more useful to us," and thereupon plied me incessantly with questions concerning every plant and shrub we passed. "Stop, stop," I said at length. "The most learned naturalist would be much puzzled with this many trees, and I have never seen any of them before, and I know them merely by description. Cannot pretend to tell you the names or explain to you the use of 1/4 of them." Discussing, however, the properties of such shrubs as I did know, we at length reached Tentholm. Everything was safe, and we set to work to collect what we wanted. I opened the butter cask from which my wife filled her pot. Fritz saw after the ammunition, and Jack and Ernest ran down to the beach to capture the geese and ducks. This they found no easy matter, for the birds, left so long alone, were shy, and nothing would induce them to come to the shore and be caught. Ernest at length hit upon an ingenious plan. He took some pieces of cheese and tied them to long strings. This bait he threw into the water, and the hungry ducks instantly made a grab at it. Then, with a little skillful maneuvering, he drew them on shore. While Jack and he were thus busily employed in catching and tying the rebels together by their feet, we procured a fresh supply of salt, which we packed upon Turk's back, first relieving him of his coat of mail. The birds we fastened to our game bags, and carefully closing the door of our tent, started homeward by the seashore. After a cheerful and pleasant walk, we once more reached our woodland abode. I released the birds and, clipping their wings to prevent their leaving us, established them on the stream. Then, after a delicious supper of potatoes, milk, and butter, we ascended our tree and turned in. Having remarked a great deal of driftwood on the sands the preceding evening, it occurred to me that it would be well to get some of it and make a kind of sledge, so that the labor of fetching what we wanted from our stores at Tentholm might not fall so heavily on ourselves. I awoke early and roused Ernest as my assistant, wishing to encourage him to overcome his natural fault of indolence. After a little stretching and yawning, he got up cheerfully, pleased with the idea of exploration while the others still slept, and we made our way to the beach, taking with us a donkey, who drew a large, broad bough, which I expected to find useful in bringing back our load. As we went along, I remarked to Ernest that I supposed he was rather sorry for himself, and grudgingly leaving his cozy hammock and pleasant dreams at this untimely hour. "Oh, father, do not laugh at my laziness. Indeed, I mean to cure myself of it. I'm very glad to go with you. I intend to shoot some more of the ortolans this morning, but there will be plenty of time afterwards. The boys will be shooting at them, I dare say, but I don't expect they will have any great luck." "Why not, pray?" inquired I. "I don't believe they will know what shot to use first, and besides, they will most likely shoot upwards at the birds and be sure to miss them, on account of the great height and thickness of the branches and foliage." "Well, Ernest, you certainly possess the gifts of prudence and reflection as well as observation. These are invaluable, but sudden action is so often necessary in life that I advise you to cultivate the power of instantly perceiving and deciding what must be done in cases of emergency. Presence of mind is a precious quality which, although natural in some characters, may be required in a certain degree by all who train themselves to it." Once on the seashore, our work was quickly accomplished. For selecting the wood I thought fit for my purpose, we laid it across the broad, leafy branch, and with some help from us, the donkey dragged a fair load of it homeward, with an addition of a small chest which I raised from among the sand which nearly covered it. We heard the boys popping away at birds as we drew near. They hastened to meet us and inquired where we had been, looking curiously at the chest, which I allowed them to open, while I asked my wife to excuse our absence without leave. After submitting to her gentle reprimand, I explained my plan for a sledge, which pleased her greatly, and she already imagined it loaded with her hogshead of butter and on its way from Tentholm to Falconhurst. The chest proved to be merely that of a common sailor, containing his clothes, very much wetted by the sea-water. The boys exhibited an array of several dozen birds, and related, during breakfast, the various incidents of failure and success which had attended their guns. Ernest had rightfully guessed the mistakes they would make, but practice was making them perfect, and seemed disposed to continue their sport, when mother, assuring them that she could not use more birds than those already killed, asked if I did not think of some means of snaring them might be contrived, as much powder and shot would be expended if they fired on at this rate. Entirely agreeing with this new view of the subject, I desired the lads to lay aside their guns for present, and the younger ones readily applied themselves to making snares of the long threads drawn from the leaves of the karatas. In a simple way I taught them, while Fritz and Ernest gave me substantial assistance in the manufacture of the new sledge. We were busily at work when a tremendous disturbance among our fowls led us to suppose that a fox or wild cat had gotten into their midst. The cocks crowed defiantly, the hens fluttered and cackled in a state of wildest excitement. We hastened toward them, but Ernest, remarking that Master Knips slipping away, as though conscious of some misdemeanor, went to watch him, and presently caught him in the act of eating a new laid egg, which he had carried off and hidden among the grass and roots. Ernest found several others. These were very welcome to my wife, and hitherto hens had not presented us with any eggs. Hereafter she determined to imprison the monkey every night until the eggs had been collected. Soon after this, as Jack was setting the newly made snares among the branches, he discovered that a pair of our own pigeons were building in the tree. It was very desirable to increase our stock of these pretty birds, and I cautioned the boys against shooting near our tree while they had nests there, and also with regard to the snares, which were meant to only entrap the wild fig-eaters. Although my sons were interested in setting their snares, they had no means approved of the new order to economize the ammunition. No doubt they had been discussing this hardship, for little Franz came to me with a brilliant proposal of his own. "Papa," said he, "why should we not begin to plant some powder and shot immediately? It would be so much more useful than bare grain for the fowls." His brother burst into a roar of laughter, and I must confess I found it no easy matter to keep my countenance. "Come, Ernest," said I know we've had our amusement. Tell the little fellow what gunpowder really is." "It is not seed at all, Franz," Ernest explained. "Gunpowder is made of charcoal, sulfur, and saltpeter, mixed cleverly together so you can see it cannot be sown like corn any more than shot can be planted like peas and beans." My carpentering meantime went on apace. In order to shape my sledge with ends properly turned up at front, I had chosen wood which had been part of the bow of the vessel, and was curved in the necessary way for my purposes. Two pieces, perfectly similar, formed the sides of my sleigh or sledge, and I simply united these strongly by fixing short bars across them. Then, when the ropes of the donkey's harness were attached to the raised points in front, the equipage was complete and ready for use. My attention had been for some time wholly engrossed by my work, and I only now observed that the mother and her little boys had been busily plucking of 24 of the wild birds, and were preparing to roast them, spitted in a row on a long, narrow sword blade, belonging to one of our ship's officers. It seemed somewhat wasteful to cook so many at once, but my wife explained that she was getting them ready for the butter cask I was going to fetch for her in the new sledge, as I advised her to preserve them half-cooked and packed in butter. Amused at her promptitude, I could do nothing less than promise to go for the cask directly after dinner. For her part, she resolved in our absence to have a grand wash of linen and other clothes, and she advised me to arrange regular baths for all the boys in the future. Early in the afternoon, Ernest and I were ready to be off, equipped as usual. Fritz presented each of us with a neat case of margay skins to hang at our girdles. We harnessed both cow and ass to the sledge, and, accompanied by Juno, cheerfully took our departure, choosing the way by the sands, and reaching Tentholm without accident or adventure. There, unharnessing the animals, we began at once to load the sledge, not only with the butter cask, but also the powder chest, a barrel of cheese, and a variety of other articles, ball, shot, tools, and Turk's armor, which had been left behind on our last visit. Our work had so closely engaged our intention that, when we were ready to leave it and go in search of a good bathing place, we discovered that our two animals had wandered quite out of sight, having crossed the bridge to reach good pasture beyond the river. I sent Ernest after them, and went alone to the extremity of the bay. It terminated in bold and precipitous cliffs, which extended into the deep water and rose abruptly, so as to form an inaccessible wall of rock and crag. Swampy ground, overgrown with large canes, intervened between me and these cliffs. I cut a large bundle of reeds and returned to Ernest. It was some time before I found him, comfortably extended full length on the ground near the tent, and sleeping as sound as a top, while the cow and ass, grazing at will, were making again for the bridge. "Get up, Ernst, you lazy fellow," exclaimed I, much annoyed. "Why don't you mind your business? Look at the animals. They'll be over the river again." "No fear of that, father," returned he, with the utmost composure. "I've taken a couple of boards off the bridge. They won't pass the gap." I could not help but laughing at the ingenious device which the boy had spared himself all trouble. At the same time, I observed that it is wrong to waste the precious moments in sleep when duty has to be performed. I then bid him go collect some salt, which was wanted at home, while I went to bathe. On coming back much refreshed, I again missed Ernest, and began to wonder whether he was still gathering salt, or whether he had lain down somewhere to finish his nap, when I heard him yell, loudly calling, "Father, father, I've caught a fish, an immense fellow he is. I can scarcely hold him, he drags the line so." Hastening toward the spot, I saw the boy lying in the grass on a point of land close to the mouth of the stream, with all his might keeping hold of a rod. The line was strained to the utmost by the frantic efforts of a very large fish, which was attempting to free itself from the hook. I quickly took the rod from him, and, giving the fish more line, led him by degrees into shallow water. Ernest ran with his hatchet and killed him. It proved to be a salmon of full 15 pounds of weight, and I was delighted to think of taking such a valuable prize to mother. "This is capital, Ernest," cried I. "You've cleared yourself for the once of the charge of laziness. Let us now carry this splendid salmon to the sledge. I will clean it and pack it for the journey, that it may arrive in good condition, while you go and take a bath in the sea." All this being accomplished, we harnessed our beast to the well-laden vehicle and replaced the boards on the bridge, commenced the journey home. We kept inland this time and were skirting the borders of the grassy thicket when Juno suddenly left us and, plunging into the bushes, with fierce barking hunted out, right in front of us, the most singular-looking creature I ever beheld. It was taking wonderfully flying leaps, and apparently in a sitting posture, and got over the ground in an astonishing rate. I attempted to shoot it as it passed, but missed. Ernest, who was behind me, observed its movements very coolly, and seeing that the dog was puzzled, and that the animal, having paused, was crouching among the grass, went cautiously nearer, fired at the spot he had marked, and shot it dead. The extraordinary appearance of this creature surprised us very much. It was as large as a sheep. Its head was shaped like that of a mouse, and its skin was also of a mouse's color. It had long ears like a hare and a tail like a tiger's. The forepaws resembled those of a squirrel, but they seemed only half grown, while the hind legs were enormous, and so long that, when upright on them, the animal would look as if mounted on stilts. For some time we stood silently wondering at the remarkable creature before us. I could not recollect to have seen or heard of any such. Well, Father Ernest, at last I should say that this was about the queerest beast to be met with anywhere. I'm glad I knocked it over. How they will stare at us when we carry it home. You have had a lucky day altogether, certainly, said I, but I cannot think what this animal can be. Examine its teeth, and let us see to what class of mammalia it belongs. We may be led to guess at its name in that way. I see 4 sharp incisor teeth, Father, 2 upper, 2 under, as a squirrel has. Ah, then he is a rodent. What rodents can you remember, Ernest? I do not know them all, but there are the mouse, the marmot, the squirrel, the hare, the beaver, the jerboa. The jerboa, I exclaimed, the jerboa. Now we shall have it. This really is very like a jerboa, only far larger. It must be a kangaroo, of the class of animals which has a pouch or purse beneath its body, in which its young can take refuge. They were discovered in New Holland by the great Captain Cook. And I congratulate you on being the first to obtain a specimen in New Switzerland, I added, laughing as I extemporized the name. The kangaroo was added to the already heavy load on our sledge, and we proceeded slowly, arriving late at Falconhurst, but meeting with the usual bright welcome. Very eager and inquisitive were the glances turned toward the sledge, for the load piled on it surpassed all expectation. We on our part staring in equal surprise at the extraordinary rig of the young folks who came to meet us. One wore a long nightshirt, which, with a belt, was a convenient length in front, but trailed behind in an orthodox ghost fashion. Another had on a very wide pair of trousers, braced up so short that each little leg looked like a clapper in a bell. The third buttoned up in a pea-jacket which came down to his ankles, and looked for all the world like a walking portmanteau. Amid much joking and laughter, the mother explained that she had been washing all day, and while their clothes were drying, the boys amused themselves by dressing up in things they found while rummaging the sailor's chest, and they kept them on, that Ernest and I might see the masquerade. It certainly amused us, but made me regret that so little belonging to ourselves had been saved from the wreck, in consequence of which the children had scarcely a change of linen. Turning now to our acquisitions, we excited great interest by exhibiting each in turn. The large salmon, but more especially the kangaroo, surprised and delighted everyone. Fritz alone wore an expression of dissatisfaction, and I saw that he was envious of his younger brother's success. Vexed that so noble a prize had fallen to Ernest's gun instead of his own, he treated it rather slightingly, but I could see that he was struggling against his jealous feelings, and he, after a while, succeeded in recovering his good humor, and joined pleasantly in the conversation. "What a famous day's sport you've had altogether," said he, coming close to me. "It will be my turn to go about with you next, will it not, Father? Just about here there is nothing to shoot, and I have found it very dull. Still, you have been doing your duty, my dear boy. You were entrusted with the care of the family, and a youth of manly character will not depend for happiness on mere excitement." As the shades of night approached, we made haste to conclude the day's work by preparing the kangaroo, part for immediate use and part for salting. The animals were fed, and a plentiful allowance of salt made to them. On our own supper, the broiled salmon and potatoes were dispatched with great appetite, and we retired with thankful hearts to sound and well-earned repose.